Okay, let's see. Any other comments? Regarding the comment on the G2, I know we talked about this. We talked about this a few weeks ago. I want to address it only because I don't think most people realize what this really means, and it is Linux related in that it's open source related and Android related and so forth, but even if you don't want to root your phone, the fact that somebody's putting an anti-root kit in the hardware of the device should...
I actually read something about the G2 after all the news came out on it, and from what I'd read, it's really not that much different from any other software-based ones that exist, so it shouldn't be all that long before there is a workaround for it.
But the fact that they're even doing it...
is there, yeah.
The fact that they're even doing it, yes. Will it eventually be cracked? Yes. In time, all of this stuff is cracked. That's the one constant we can look forward to. When somebody tries to screw you, the consumer, some dedicated hacker who has nothing better to do than go, I'll show you, is absolutely interested in doing everything they can to make sure you have the rights as a consumer. But it should irk you that anybody does this. It really should.
Yeah.
And the only reason we're bringing back up and readdressing it is because I'm not saying this as I'm not picking on this person because they're just one of about 7 people that brought this up. My honest assessment on this is it should irk all of us. Rather you want to root your device or not, because effectively what they're doing there is saying it isn't your device. It's their device and you're just leasing it from them, and they're going to tell you what you can do with it. Even if
I'm still a little bit curious about how firmware updates would work at that point. Or not firmware, but, Android updates.
That's the other reason this should irk you, and I was fixing to get into that.
Right.
I think the honest assessment that the carriers want to go through with these devices is, oh, you'd like your device updated? Please come buy a new one.
Yeah. Or there'll be an exchange program where they'll have to do like a hardware update or something.
Exactly. And I think that's where they want it.
You didn't transfer all your data, sorry.
Yeah, basically, well, no, and they'll charge you a fee for that. That used to be a service that every carrier did. They're like, oh, bring your phone here, and for $50, we'll transfer your address book from phone A to phone B. And so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't work that way anymore because what more and more of them have started doing, at least as far as the GSM carriers, is they want to store all that data in the SIM card. So when you pull the SIM card, it moves it with it. And in the case of Android devices, you don't need to move your data because it's all linked to your Gmail account. So if you have auto syncing on, it's like when you sign into your brand new I've never touched it Android device and put in your login for whatever Google account you link to your Android, everything's there. It's like same background picture, same everything is there. It's like you have the following applications that need updates. And they're all back. It's like yada yada and so forth. Creepy, but useful. But it's the last thing we want. This is like a rub that's developing in Android, in that the carriers want it on the shortest possible leash possible, where you have to go to them to get permission to use the features of your phone. And that's something to be very scared of. I mean, they're already trying to keep the built-in tethering out of Android. Say Android 3.0 has other built-in features that the carrier would very much like to charge you from. Putting hardware chips and lockdowns like this in a phone is basically saying, no, we're not going to push updates out to your phone. You have to come to us, give us the new extra $50 a month premium for the new feature that's built into the OS, and then we'll allow you to have it. And I know that's the business model they're trying to adopt. It's up to all of us to make it clear to them that isn't going to fly. If we don't make it clear to them, they're going to do it. Right. If we make it clear to them they lose our business if they try it, they'll go, okay, we'll figure another way to make money off of you. That's more fair.
Yeah.
All right. Moving right along. You want to go into the thing we kind of covered the other week in gaming on Linux, or do you want to go into the stray thought I had on hard drives up at the top?
I was looking at the question about BSD actually, but
Okay, let's go there. That's fine. Yeah, this is. I don't know if this is a question or a comment. It's like, and there's open source projects that do this. It's like they'll say, oh, well, Unix, Linux, and BSD, they're all the same. For the purpose of a binary, that's true. In some cases. It depends on the binary. But they're not the same. I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think it's just sloppy. Because...
I think this guy's in particular has to do with sites like DistroWatch, where it's a Linux distro site that has a bunch of stuff about BSD-based distros on it, or something to that effect.
Now that's open source crossing, and it's like we call this show Linux, but really we talk about anything that's even remotely related to open source, which includes Linux desktop distros, Linux independent projects, BSD, open source software suites, Android, so on and so forth.
And actually, this comment is a large part of the reason why I honestly get at least 1 to 2 comments a week, people asking if I'll review PCBSD, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, ReactOS, Haiku, all of these non-Linux distros/operating systems. And I say, I'll put it on the list and look at it, but it's going to be way down the list because it's not Linux.
It's not Linux. It's like...
My stuff is this week in Linux. If I was something else, that'd be different. But and I will look at them eventually. But that's part of the reason I'm not wanting to confuse people by saying this week in Linux we're going to talk about BSD,
which isn't Linux. It's like you can make arguments for talking about Android because Android does use the Linux kernel.
Yeah, Android is Linux-based.
Yeah, well, it's like, if we're honest, everything that has been come to be called Linux is actually Linux-based, because Linux is a kernel. When you throw a bunch of other things on top of it, then it becomes a Linux OS. It's
something entirely different.
Yeah, which is just an entirely different thing. But, a kernel isn't really useful without all these other packs and things and other stuff on top of it. No matter what
the packs are not that useful without the kernel to run it.
Exactly, which is why it's called Linux. And then you have the purist people who insist that it is GNU Linux. And then I forget what the other Linux...
GNU/Linux.
Well, then there's that. I'm referring to the fact that the purist people want to go... Because technically version 2 point whatever of Linux was version 1.0 with the elements of G... It got combined with GNU. And then that became modern Linux, on which other things are built. And there's purist people who insist it's like, no, it's not Linux. Linux was 1.0. Linux was horrible. GNU Linux is like they're the purists. It's like I'm not a purist, but
I'm not a purist. I'm a realist.
It's like, yeah, it's this is like becoming a big rub, and it really is. And it's like at the end of the day, it's all marketing. It's that's causing this confusion. I'm not even sure it really matters from an end user perspective as long as they know which one's right for them, but it does get confusing at times. And I'm not sure there's a way to unconfuse it at this point. I guess branding, like some of the more popular distros are doing, it's like when you, for mobile, you don't think Linux, even though it is. You think Android. And soon, maybe I've forgotten its name again. What's that other Linux mobile?
Migo.
Say that again?
Migo,
yeah. And we might be thinking Android and Migo. They'll both be Linux, but they'll be entirely different flavors of Linux, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Well, I think to address the problem that was actually brought up, the Linux sites that show off non-Linux items, for those sites that are doing it, it might be worth either having a disclaimer or maybe just a little image that says Linux or not Linux. I don't know. That would be the quick way, would be to suggest to whatever site it is, if it is a problem for you, to just have them label it whether it is or is not Linux.
Probably.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Because I know I actually read on the DistroWatch site that they started out only intending to talk about Linux, but as other BSD-based Haiku, ReactOS, whatever, as they have become more popular, people have asked them to start including them, and they're not going to just turn it away.
Well, no, and that's the thing. It's like, it's where this problem spurs from is Linux are, you know, the little cute little Tux is the most predominantly known open source project. It's not necessarily the most predominant used. That depends on a lot of other things, and there's other ones, but it's kind of become synonymous. And Linux, like we're saying, is not the only open source operating system. You know, BSD is another one, and really, at the end of the day, the common thread between all these discussions and everything else that I'm bringing up isn't Linux, it's open source. Which in and of itself is a confusing concept, because it's like free does not make it open source doesn't mean it's free. You gotta learn the rules of the ecosystem type thing. And anyone who's confusing the rules is confusing everybody, especially noobs. So I think, like you're saying, the disclaimer is probably the best way to address that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on the stuff that I do on my channel, I actually do talk about non-Linux based things from time to time, but I honestly can't think of a time when I have, but if I were to, I would make sure to go out of the way and say, just so you know, this isn't Linux. This is, even though this isn't Linux related, blah, blah, blah. I do remember saying that quite a few times.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a recent one you did. Probably...
A large portion of the time, it's Google has done X, and I just
it's like you're talking about something that's been made. Actually, VP8's probably the last time you did it, to be quite honest. No, I think you've done it since VP8.
Yeah, probably.
It's...
Well, talking about web browsers, I mean, those are not directly Linux related.
Yeah, although they are available. Many of them are available on Linux. As a matter of fact, I think the only two web browsers that are not available on Linux are IE and Safari. We can name them because they're the only two.
And the newer versions of IE are only available on Windows 7.
Yeah, and James corrected me on that. Apparently, it is available for Vista. No, it was you who corrected me on that. It's available for Vista Service Pack 2. But good news figuring that out, because when you go to Microsoft's site and you search for IE9 Beta, the page it directs you to is IE9 Beta Windows 7 only. So, I believe Wikipedia, and I'm sure it's hidden on Microsoft's site somewhere, but it's very clear Microsoft is not promoting Vista in any way, shape, or form anymore. So I wonder why. It's like...